your if you use your question and answer and chat function boxes at the bottom to type your questions, and I'll be able to field these questions for Andy. So, Andy, I don't think I've missed anything else.
That's good.
I'll hand you over. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Reece. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so the plan of today, we're going to cover 3 key sections as outlined on the invite that have been put together. So the first section we'll look at is the actual cost of rearing and how you calculate that. We'll then look at the negotiable, or more importantly, the non-negotiable aspects of heifer rearing, and then we'll cover a little bit about what different systems or how you can actually run those heifers round, and how best to achieve the growth rates and everything else that you need to. And as Reece said, we will really encourage questions. I'm used to standing in front of a group of farmers, and I always prefer people to chip in and ask questions all the way through rather than me sitting there waffling on. So please do ask as many questions as you like. Okay, so covering a few basics first. Your heifer rearing cost on farm is your second largest cost after feed, plain and simple. It's fairly obvious, but a lot of people don't think about it. There is absolutely no income from those heifers until you've actually calved them down for the first time and they're into their first lactation. And once you've done that, in general, across the UK, we find that around about 25% of heifers pay back in that first lactation, but most heifers go well beyond that, second, third, fourth, fifth lactation in some cases. So obviously efficiency and achieving those growth rates and everything else that we'll go through today is absolutely crucial to ensure paybacks as soon as possible. And really, the whole point of this is looking at what is the biggest influence on cost when we're rearing those heifers. So normally in a meeting, I'd be standing there and asking now, how much does it cost you to rear your heifers? And obviously we can't do that very easily. But if I go back to my time at AHDB, and particularly when we ran the calf to calving program, if you've got a group of 20, 25 farmers in front of you and we asked how much does it cost to rear a heifer, the range would usually be somewhere between £800 and £1,200 from birth through to calving. That's all fine, but in most cases that was an estimate. People weren't actually sitting down and working out the costs. So if we actually look at the cost in different systems, so this is not a too complicated graph, but this was some work carried out by Alana Bolton through RVC on her PhD. And she found on average, the number I've circled there is the on average in the UK, heifers are calving at 26 months. This was in the survey she ran of just over 100 farms. When we look at NMR and milk recording data and CIS data, we find actually the average is nearer 28 months. So as Reece said at the start, the ideal is really calving those heifers at 22 to 24 months, and we'll cover why that's important as we go through. But actually in the UK, we're quite a long way shy of that mark. What we can clearly see from Alana's data is, though, that actually the earlier you calve them, there is a significant saving to be had in the costs. So as Reece said, that 23 to 24 month period, you're saving somewhere between 15 and 20% of that cost by calving them earlier, as long as they're well grown and they've achieved the targets. So we've got to absolutely, if you're a block calving her, which a lot of farms are, you've got to be hitting that 24-month target. When we actually look at the figures, and if I refer back to the calf to calving data, we found a lot of leaving those block calving farms, the heifers weren't necessarily all calved in by 24 months. They were missing that 25 and a half months, as you'll find. And what you then tend to see are those heifers dropping out after the first or second lactation. So they're only just paying back before they've dropped out of the system. So you've got to make sure they're calving in by 24 months. If we then look at the repayment period, as I said, 25% of those farms are calving in within that first year. Around about 91%, so that's including the 25% of then repaid the cost of that rearing by the end of their second lactation. But as you can see on the graph there, we've got some farms in Alana's data set that were into the third, fourth, fifth lactation before they've paid back. Now, if you think in the UK, we average around about 3.6 lactations for an animal. There are quite a few animals that aren't even paying back at all in that period, and you can pick those and you see them when you go around. So we talk about age at first calving, and we talk about the importance of age when they calve. So along the top, the numbers across the top are the age in months of calving. As I said, from Alana's data, we're looking at this 26-month period. You can see, if you look at calving assistance and you look at cow still alive and you look at total milk in those first few years, you can see the effect of actually calving those animals earlier. If you then look at the 32-month period, which is 3 years, and we just under 3 years, we still see a lot of animals calving in at 3 years. Certainly those going through the auction ring, often in a cattle mart on a weekday morning, they look big, strong heifers. But if you then look at their date of birth, a lot of them are 2.5, 3 years of age. Those are the animals that you are going to have issues with calving. The likelihood of them still being in the herd 5 years later is drastically reduced. And if you look at total milk output in that period, it's a huge difference. So we know in the UK from Alana's data, the average is at just over 118 pounds for every heifer from the point they're born through to the point they calve into the herd. If we then take Alana's figures, you're adding an additional 745 pounds onto that cost by calving them down at 32 months. But if you go the other way and you achieve the 24 months, you're nearly 300 pounds off, and you're just over 300 pounds down at 22 months. So you can see there's significant savings to be had. But first of all, you really need to work out what your average age at first calving is. And a lot of farms still don't know, or they're not really sure where that is. So that would be a good starting point. We know from all the data Alana carried out and all the research she looked at that for every single day over 24 months, it's costing you an average of £2.87 extra. So you can soon do the maths for a 100 cow herd with a 20% replacement rate. If they go 10 days over their 24 months average age at first calving, you're looking at nearly £600 extra cost for rearing those heifers through the system. So it's really important that we do target this. We are talking big numbers, but for a lot of farms, you're not actually writing that check. So it's quite difficult to actually visualize that figure until you sit down and work it out. It's not something that you're writing a check, because if you're writing the check for £574 for the extra, you'd soon do something about it. But a lot of that costs caught up in the general farming system. What we then also need to look at are the challenges. So one of the key areas that I targeted with calf to calving was the calf losses. So we don't have any more up-to-date data. The data has not been updated since I ran calf to calving, and the last of those meetings was back in 2017. But at the time, we knew that 8% of bull and heifer calves died within the first 24 hours or were classed as stillborn. We then also knew that 2.5 of those that had got beyond that stage died within a month. And overall, we were losing a further 14% failed to reach their first lactation. So you can do the maths. If you assume it's 4% of heifers die in the first 24 hours, plus another 2.5, plus another 14%, you can see why we've got a big problem. That's an issue from a consumer point of view, but from a cost point of view, all those animals that die on your farm, if they've not paid back, all the other animals then have to carry the cost of that loss. So it's a bit blunt to say, but the early losses are the best and are the cheapest. If you lose them pre-weaning, it's not cost you a huge amount to get to that stage, and that cost will spread across the farm, across the other animals left. But if you lose an animal early in her first lactation, say, or just pre-calving, there's a lot of cost there to be associated onto all those other animals. So that 14% of tagged heifers failing to reach their first lactation, first calving, that's a lot of money to add up. We then add in the additional 15% who calve for the first time but don't calve for a second time. We're talking huge numbers and a significant impact on farm cash flow. So there are options out there. There are various tools to use, but you've paid for this one. As a dairy farm, you've already paid for the heifer rearing calculator to be produced by AHDB Dairy. It's well worth going through. This is just a screenshot of the first page. I believe Reese, you might be able to nod, included the link. Yeah, so Reese included the link when he sent out the details for the Zoom link this morning. It's worth going in there and looking at it. I would say there's a lot of detail to go in this. It's not something you're going to do in 10 minutes. You need to allocate a morning to sit down and work these costs through as accurately as possible. But it will give you an end figure of exactly how much it's costing you for birth to weaning, weaning to conception, and then conception through to calving. And you're then able to work out exactly where the main cost is and where you can start to make savings or adjust your management accordingly. So taken from this same data set, if you look at the birth to weaning stage, the average is £3.14 per day during the weaning stage, but you can see the range there of £1.68 through to £6.11. Now, it's important to remember, birth to weaning looks really expensive on paper, but it's the most efficient time you're going to grow that calf. So we'll talk about milk powder shortly, but there's a lot of milk powder costs to go into that. There's also a lot of labour time because it's very labour intensive. But I would say of all the areas you're going to save money, I would not be looking to scrimp on the birth to weaning stage, because that will set the calf up in that first 8 to 10 weeks. It will set the calf up for the rest of its growing period, but then the rest of its life as well. So you've got to get that period right. Now, I'm not suggesting you go out and spend £6 a calf, but I think the average is probably quite reasonable. Weaning into conception, as again, you can then see the variation, but on average is £1.65. And then conception to calving is £1.64. And ignore the figure at the bottom because I'm not quite sure what's happened there. There's an error in the spreadsheet. So just ignore that bottom line on total rearing cost. That doesn't add up, but don't worry about that. So the most important bit is the birth to weaning stage. Get that correct and it will make them fly through the rest of their growth period. So as I've mentioned, the cost on average is £1,800, but that did range in Alana's data set from just over £1,000 a head through to over £3,000 a head. So as I say, it's important that you know where you sit in that range. The cheapest farm, the farm that was rearing the calves, the cheapest at just under £1,000, had also got a 40% replacement rate. So just because you're doing things cheaply does not mean that you're rearing good, efficient calves. You need to make sure that actually a little bit of extra cost, if that means that provides longevity for that calf, it's worth spending that little bit extra. £2.87 a day on average over 24 months, and then 22 to 24 months is really that crucial period you're targeting for the calving period.
Okay, so that's the first section they're looking at costs. So does anybody have any questions on the so far on the cost of rearing? If you can just type them into the chat function at the bottom. If you can't think of one on the spot now, don't worry. We'll be able to have an opportunity at the end. That if there is a burning question that you have now, please put that in the chat box. Just a touch on contract rearing heifer costs, Andy, and maybe just while we wait for the question. I've heard of different sorts of options of payments, sort of £1 per head per day seems to be a figure that's branded around the place. Now, have you done any work or have you come across any systems of contract heifer rearing that has a fair and an accurate way of calculating?
I think I've got several clients who are involved with heifer rearing either themselves or they send the heifers away. It really depends on how much input the heifer owner is putting into those calves or heifers as they go through the rearing period. In most cases, they'll go to a heifer rearer post weaning so that they've got full control over that key period. And then the cost range is probably between about £1.30 up to around £160, £170, £180, depending on the farm. The ones down at £130, usually the key input from the heifer owner is they'll put the concentrates in, and they'll also be putting in the semen in for service as well. So they're probably the two key parts of that. In a lot of cases, the person heifer rearing is often an ex-dairy farm, so they've got a good understanding of stock and how to manage those, and it's really the labour element that you put in there. I think the most important thing to have in place when if you are looking at heifer rearing or contract heifer rearing is a good contract. And when you're putting that contract in place, it's making sure that you've got measurable aspects of that contract. So you can put in there heifer rear weights, which will be an important aspect of it. You want them heifers to reach the targets, but you need to offset that and make sure that it's clear that there is also a feed barrier in there as well. There's a limit to how much feed they're putting into them, because you can very quickly achieve feed rate or achieve a growth rate if you just bang loads of feed in front of them, and you can hit all the targets in the world, but it can become really expensive. So you just need to make sure you outline it really carefully. We as a company put quite a lot of contract rearing agreements in place, as do a lot of other consultancy firms and a lot of other people.
Yeah. Okay, that's sound advice. And I suppose the calculator tool could just give somebody a bit of a start if they are thinking rearing heifers on contract, just to, and then maybe if they need further advice to contact firms like yourself or to nail it down properly. Okay, thanks, Andy. There's so far no questions have come in on that particular section. So we'll move on, and then
so the next bit's really looking at negotiable and non-negotiable aspects of heifer rearing. I've kind of dropped the negotiable bit, if I'm honest, because I think actually the key thing here is if you get the non-negotiables right, you can have a fair bit of flexibility in there as to how you do things. So I think the first thing is really colostrum management. Now that may seem straightforward and you may think there's not a lot of cost to it, but there are some little costs, and I think the little costs are well worth investing in. So the first thing would be a refractometer. So if you get the colostrum management right, and that's generally would be 3 litres of colostrum within the first 2 hours of life in one feed. Now, we know from there's been a lot of research done into this, and there's a lot of information out there on leaving calves to suckle dam and all the rest of it. In most cases, just over 50% of calves were found not to have received sufficient colostrum by leaving them to suckle. So I think in most farms, you need to intervene at this stage. So a refractometer, you can go on Amazon or other shops or websites, wherever you like to go. One of these will cost you anywhere between 10 to 12 pounds. They're not very expensive. It's just a basic, straightforward bricks refractometer with a 0 to 32 scale. So that's the important bit. The one I've got, which looks like the one in the photo, is actually a beer and wine tester. So it's got multiple use. As soon as you put calf or young stock or anything like that in front of it, when you're looking for a bricks, if you put a calf bricks refractometer, you're talking 80 or 90 pounds. It's exactly the same piece of kit. You don't need to spend a lot of money on it. So buy a bricks refractometer. That will tell you what the colostrum quality is. And then the other thing is, in a lot of cases, people are short of time and they need something easy to do. Now, for a lot of farms, they'll tube the calves. So they'll get a bag and tube the colostrum because they know they've had it. Now at night, that's fine, but we do see increased risk of increased health risk issues with tubing. And I'm a big believer in actually starting them off on a teat bottle and getting them to suckle that way. It is time consuming. I'm well aware of that, but best practice, I would still recommend we go down the bottle route. And as I said before, actually, this is where the time investment's needed. So there is a cost to your time. It might be your farm, but you've always got to allow for your time to build that in. So make sure this is done properly. And then it's making sure they get the second feed of colostrum as well within 12 hours and go forward. And ideally, you're looking to feed them colostrum for the first 3 or 4 days to see other health benefits as well. So that's the colostrum bit. The second bit's depending on how you feed, you can feed whole milk. There's no issue with that. We'll talk a little bit about health later in Joni's risk and everything else. But if you're looking at milk powders, there are a huge number of milk powders on the market. When we looked at this, there were nearly 150 milk powders available of all varieties and qualities, and every company that sells them, they've got the best powder according to them. And actually, there's some fairly basic rules you can follow, which we'll kind of go through now. So if you look at on the side of a milk packet or milk bag, in most cases, you ask somebody what it all means and they're not completely sure. They see percentages, they see things listed. But actually, if you speak to the feed companies, you tend to find the additives and everything else of the bit that they're promoting really heavily. So in simple terms, a composition on the right-hand side of the bag there is listed in descending order of inclusion. So your wheat gluten are in the middle, your magnesium oxide is the least quantity within the bag. So that's fairly straightforward. If you then look at the protein source, this is absolutely critical. Certainly for young calves, anything under 3 weeks of age, a young calf cannot digest vegetable protein. So you need to make sure the powder is whey or skimmed based. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of difference in it, but you need to make sure that that protein is whey or skimmed. So out of all the things you look at, that's the most important. Vegetables, palm oil, coconut, as I said before, they're not easily digested for calves under 2 to 3 weeks of age, and they do increase the risk of scour. We've got an increasing challenge coming with this as well. The supermarkets are now, certainly Waitrose and Marks and Spencers, and I suspect the others will follow suit, have now banned or in the process of banning soya and palm oil in feeds, and that will include milk powders. I have not found a milk powder yet that does not have palm oil in. So there is a big challenge coming there for milk powder producers to actually deal with that issue. If you then look at the analytics and the constituents, so you're looking for proteins, oils, fiber, ash. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I would have thought if you've got percentages there, it should add up to 100%. Now, if you do the maths, that doesn't add up to 100%. So not everything is included. They're only listing the things that are legally required. So you need to work that through. So lactose is a large part of the percentage there. There's also water in there. So it's understanding exactly what's in the bag. Crude fiber, this is a really good indication of how much plant protein you've got in the milk powder. So this bag's at 0%, which is great. Anything above 0.2%, which a lot of the milk powders are, is indicating there's a reasonable level of plant protein in there. So just be careful with that. And then the second part linked to that is then ash. So the ash percentage, ideally you want it below 7%. There are a lot of powders that are at 8, 9, 10. I've even seen them up at 11%. And again, this is seriously increasing the risk of scour on the bag. So it's always worth looking at the ingredients on the side of it. And as I said before, actually the bottom part of the bag is adding all the other bits, and this is usually the bit they're banging on about vitamin E and vitamin A and vitamin D. When you actually look at the sales information on the powders, in general, there's not a huge amount of difference in these. You're talking about very small percentage changes. So actually, this bit is, although it's important, it's not the key bit that you need to be looking at. You need to be looking at the basic ingredients of the milk powder. Now, I'll show you in a second what that breakdown should be, but a great place to start is actually, if you're looking at buying milk powders, to get a couple of different companies to quote price-wise, but also to give you the breakdown of the milk powder. This is a milk powder calculator that's been produced by Ginny Sherwin as part of the Nottingham University project. And what you can do is input the details of the milk powder. You can put the age of the calf, what the calf weighs, what growth rate you're looking for, how much concentrate you're feeding that calf, and it will tell you if, in the green boxes on the right-hand side, it will tell you if that milk powder is able to deliver the growth rates that you need for those calves based on environment and everything else. Now, it is literally that one page, and it will give you the information. All the information down the left-hand side in the top box is available on the milk powder bag, and as is the amount you're going to feed. If you've got 2 or 3 powders options to look at, what this will let you do is feed them all in, and you can then see how many grams of each powder you need to feed to achieve those growth rates. So you can work through and say, actually, this powder is going to be more efficient. We need to feed slightly less of it or slightly more of it, and it is therefore more efficient because we'll get a better growth rate from it. So I think it's a really good, useful tool to have. So in basic terms, you're looking for the protein to ideally be 26% or above. You're looking for the fats and oils to be 18 to 20%, the ash to be less than 7%, the fiber to be less than 0.02%. And then, as I said before, the key question really is around the soya and palm oil, and can the producers of the milk powders adjust to meet the demand that the supermarkets are placing on people? Because at the moment, we haven't got an option to feed. And as I said, kind of indicated, actually, the price of the powder doesn't always mean you're buying quality. You can often find you can buy a slightly cheaper powder that will give you the growth rates and provide the ingredients that you need. So don't always go on price. It's always worth looking at actually what the milk powder is made up of. I don't really want to stop there. Is there any questions coming on that? Or we can just pick them up after, I don't mind. No, crack on. Okay. So that's the milk powder. The second bit's really the hard feed. So I think a lot of people, you need to look at putting water in front of the calf from day one, and you also need to look at putting a concentrate in front of the calf from day one. They'll only pick at it, but they will start to build the rumen bugs to start to develop. Now, I'm a big believer in consistency. So I always think it's worth, if you can put a feed in front of a calf from day one, that you then take them right the way through the weaning period and well into the rearing period, it's worth looking at. So there are a lot of products on the market. We've got a lot of information around calf starter pellets, or you can buy a calf blend or mix, as we've got here. Now, there's been a lot of work done in this, and what they actually found was if you buy a mix like I've shown in the picture there, the calves just tend to sort it. They pick out the sweeties and they leave the other bits behind. So I always think of it's fine, but it's quite expensive, and although it makes you feel better because it looks so you're giving the calf different things to pick through, you tend to find they're not actually picking up everything they need. So in a lot of cases, you're better off just buying a straightforward rearer pellet. It doesn't need to be a little tiny weaner pellet. I found that the intakes on the rearer pellets tended to be better when we were looking at the calf to calving farms. So a 5 to 6 mil nut will take a calf from day one right the way through the rearing period if needed, with one consistent element of their diet all the way through. So some basics, ideally looking for maize, oats, whole cereals, potentially soya, linseed and rape, and probably an 18% crude protein cake, although that can drop down to 16% if they've got a lot of grass, good quality grass going into them, and you can even remove it completely if the growth rates are acceptable. Now I've highlighted the minerals in red. I think this is often an element that is probably possibly overlooked on farms, certainly those that are grazing or out wintering. Minerals are absolutely crucial. We see a lot of calves suffering from mineral deficiencies. A heifer suffering from mineral deficiency, it can be a big indication of a mineral deficiency if you're getting a lot of stillbirths. That can be iodine based or other minerals as well, but it's well worth understanding exactly what the mineral requirement is of that calf, whether that be through blood tests or whether that's through testing the grass or crop to understand exactly what the mineral content is. As I say, it doesn't need to be complicated, and again, actually buying a rearer nut that's a 5 to 6 mil rearer nut, you'll often find it's got better ingredients in than a weaner pellet, and in a lot of cases the farm will buy weaner pellets in small bags or in 25 kilo bags, which is then more expensive as well. So actually you can cut some of the cost out at that level. The next bit is probably, in my mind, after colostrum management, this is probably the second most important thing. So the only way you're going to know what these animals are doing is if you weigh them. Now, with calf to calving, one of the key things I did at the meetings was actually get people estimating weights. And I think Reese was involved with this a couple of times, where we went out into the fields and we guessed the weight of the calves or the heifers at any age. You can't guess. People are absolutely rubbish at it. That's vets, feed companies, farmers. I don't care who you are. Nobody. I had a bottle of whiskey in the car and I travelled around in my car for nearly 3 years and I never gave it away because nobody ever managed to guess the weight of the calf, or the heifer. So I'm confident in my statement that estimates are rubbish. This is just one of the snapshots from calf to calving. So the orange dots were the target weights for these animals, and each dot is there's a blue dot and a red dot that corresponds. The red dot was the targets for these animals at 15 months of age. So the blue dots are then showing exactly where those heifers are against target. So you can see from there, well over 50% of those animals were below target from where they should have been at that growth period. And I can put every graph up from calf to calving to show pretty much the same story at every stage. Until we've got people measuring and weighing, people are just missing those targets and really struggling to hit those targets. We've got some quite good consistency in there across a group of animals, but they're still not where they need to be. So weighing is absolutely crucial. You can get a weigh band. I don't know whether HDB have still got some left, but I certainly got some made up for calf to calving that you can get them free, or you can go and buy one for £5 or £6 from local ag merchant. These are pretty good. We found they were within about 10% of actual growth. Very good up to about 6-7 weeks of age. A little bit dubious around weaning as the calf starts to grow frame rather than weight, and then they come back pretty accurate for the rest of their life. So that's a pretty cheap, straightforward way of measuring growth. Obviously, the optimum would be to go down the electric route. You're looking £1,200 will buy you a good set of weigh bars with an electric recording box. A lot of these now you can link them to software, you can upload it onto the computer and you can track growth rates and you can do everything you want with them. I think it's well worth investing. A lot of these are usually available on the grants as well, so you can get 40% off a set of weigh kit. You can set them under the crush, under the calf, crate, wherever you like to, but I think it's well worth investing. We did look at the kind of traditional method of withers heights, but we found withers height didn't really correspond with growth rates. Now, you need to make sure they're not overly fat, but on 3 of the calf to calving farms, we actually found they could serve the heifers 2 months earlier than they were planning, purely because they'd actually reached growth rates. So they need to be 60%, 50% to be cycling and 60% to be served. But most farms actually were waiting too long, and therefore they could bring their age at first calving back by a month or two just by serving them earlier. The other thing we found on one farm who was using withers height, he got a little mark on the wall in the heifer shed, and once they reached this mark, he'd put them in for service. Now that was great, but it was on the bedded area. So as the bedding built up, obviously the height at service also reduced. So just be a little bit sensible about where you're actually looking to weigh them. So basic figures on growth rates. You need to double birth weight by 56 days. That's critical before you even start looking at weaning. You're looking for the heifer to be 26% of her mature weight by 6 months, 50% of her mature weight by 12 months, because she's then reproduction, she's cycling and she's ready for service. Serve at 60%, and then you're looking for them to be 85% of that mature weight post calving. So they're kind of the key targets you need to hit. Now, ideally, you're also putting the weight in about 10 days after weaning to make sure you've not got a check. So, or you might weigh them at TB testing or worming and everything else. So there's a lot of other periods where you can weigh them and they probably need weighing, but they would be the key targets that you need to hit. So next bit is environment. And this may seem as though I'm just talking about not necessarily cost, but these all do have a cost associated with them. So from a calf point of view, we know that they do suffer from cold, and anything below 15 degrees for a calf under 3 weeks of age, they will start to suffer cold stress. If you go the other way, anything over 25 degrees, the calf starts to suffer heat stress. Now, once they're in either of those areas, they're starting to use the feed that they've been fed, what they've been fed, they're starting to use it to either keep their core warm or keep their core cold rather than putting it into growth. So they're not as efficient as they should be. So this is some data from the farm down in Hampshire where we looked at temperatures. So there were 2 sheds. There was a more traditional Bayer type stone barn, which is the red line. And then the blue line were some calf hutches that were 3 calves per hutch in the main yard. The number up the side is in degrees centigrade. So you can see during the heat of a September day, the calf hutch had reached 45 degrees inside the hutch during the day. Now that's fine because most people say they can get outside, but this was in the middle of a concrete yard, so there's absolutely no shelter. So the calf was still up around 35 degrees in direct sunlight. Whereas actually the old traditional barn was pretty good. It was fairly consistent and would keep the temperature more controlled. If we then look at the temperatures in January, and I said that 15 degrees is really the cutoff point, as you can see there, actually the hutches came into their own at this time because at points during the day the calves were above 15 degrees, but the vast majority of the time they were sat under that 15 degree, and actually at night they were below freezing as well. So it's making sure you adjust the feed accordingly, as I showed in the previous slide, to make sure you compensate and give them compensatory food to ensure they continue growing. The other option, and alongside that, is obviously calf jackets. I think these are fantastic. A lot of farms have them. The 2 key things with this, you need to make sure that they're washable at 60 degrees, because a lot of them aren't. The 60-degree part is absolutely critical from a preventing disease point of view. And the other thing is you need to make sure they're breathable. And again, a lot of them are not breathable, and you can end up with infestation on the calves' backs, and they sweat a lot if they can't get air to them, as you're not going to start taking the jackets on and off every day depending on the temperature. So I think calf jackets are great, but obviously there's a cost associated. Which kind of brings us on to biosecurity. So I think this is another area that's overlooked on a lot of farms. I think it is worth investing in foot dips and new pairs of Wellington boots to make sure that actually when you're in with the calves, you have clean gear and you're not just going from milking the cows through to the calves, because this is where a lot of disease is transferred over. You've got to remember, for the first 10, 15 days, that calf's immune system is either not there or is only just starting to build up. So you need to make sure that you're providing a really biosecure and clean environment for those calves to be reared and looked after. So again, a second set of boots just to look after, and a clean foot bath at the entrance to every calf house, I think is a crucial part of calf rearing. So the last bit really on this section is looking at health. So A lot of heifers reared outside, no issue with that at all, as long as they're not suffering from cold stress. But you've got to think of a few, just consider a few aspects. The first one being pooled milk. So a lot of these systems will feed whole milk. What's your Johne's risk? So very quickly you can spread Johne's through a group of young calves if there's something you're not picked up on, or that Johne's risk cow's not been isolated. Similarly, if you've got high cell count cows, or you've got cows that have been on antibiotics, there is a tendency or a opportunity on some farms to feed that waste milk. Don't do it. There's a lot of research now from Nottingham University and around the world that shows that calves have built up immunity to penicillins and other antibiotic treatments, and that has been tracked back to come through from what they've been fed as calves. Vaccination policy, again, it's understanding your risk and understanding what issues you've got on farm, and working with your vet to put a vaccination policy in place. There are so many vaccines out there. You could spend all day and an absolute fortune vaccinating your calves, but a lot of them may not be necessary. So it's understanding exactly what you need to use on your farm and using the appropriate ones. Coccidiosis and crypto do build up, certainly for all year round calving herds. This is a major issue, but it is also in the block calving herds when you tend to get towards the end of a block. Again, it's using appropriate disinfectants. With Coxy, it's either putting something in the cake, so you feed them, or drenching them accordingly to treat it. Crypto is probably the biggest risk for scour on farm. This the key treatment for this is, again, it's steam cleaning. Referring back to the calf jackets, it's washing the calf jackets at 60 degrees. It's allowing air and allowing your sheds to dry and have a rest. And then it's also, a lot of the disinfectants out there don't work on crypto. So it's making sure if you're using a disinfectant that is crypto approved. So the likes of FAM30 don't have any impact on crypto at all. So it's making sure you've got the right disinfectant. Worming policy, again, it's making sure you use your weigh data and actually you treat accordingly for worming. You can if you're estimating weights, which a lot of farms do at this stage, you can either be under treating and therefore building up resistance, or over treating and therefore spending a lot of money on wormers. It's also worth doing worm counts, because there's a set worming strategy on the back of the packet doesn't necessarily mean that you're not slipping either side of that. So it's worth doing a worm count when you're coming close up to worming period. And then breeding. This is really a huge area, and I'm not going to go into this in a huge amount of detail. It's a lot of the background that I was involved with, but I think if you've got the opportunity to put handling facilities in and a race and be able to handle those animals, it's well worth serving to AI, whether that be sexed or conventional semen, and actually breeding your future genetics from your heifers. It will give you the fastest genetic gain if it's available. Cost-wise, again, this is an area where you can very quickly slip over that 24 months age at first calving if you keep serving and keep serving. So again, it's probably 1, possibly 2 serves to dairy, and then breeding to beef thereafter. So the animal might come into the farm, but you're not breeding your future stock from potentially poorer fertility genetics as they come into the herd. Again, information around bulls and everything else is widely available from lots of sources.
We have had one question which referring to the beginning of the section, Andy.
Yeah.
What is a good score on the refractometer for colostrum? So
on a basic refractometer, you're looking for anything to be over 22%. Now, it's not a linear score on the data, so just because it's at 28% doesn't mean it's X amount better. It just means it is better. So as long as it's above 22, that's a good quality colostrum. It's probably worth mentioning, if people are looking to freeze colostrum, which I would recommend in case you do get some poorer colostrum, it only wants to be that milk that's over 22%, or that colostrum over 22%.
Would you be happy with heifer colostrum, which is 22%?
Yes.
Confident in heifer's colostrum?
I am confident. I think as long as they've had good transition, then you can still get good quality colostrum from a heifer. As long as you've got enough. It's often quantity that can be a challenge, so I don't think there's an issue there. But yeah, absolutely. I think if it's at the right level, then it's fine. It's always worth doing some ZSTs or some total protein tests on the calves at around 5 to 7 days to make sure that they've not only, if you've fed the right colostrum, to make sure that they've then actually absorbed it and their antibodies have built up.
Well, I don't know much about the powdered colostrum, to be honest with you. I know the sheep lambing job uses some of it. Is that an option, a cost-worthy option, or?
It's expensive. They're better than they used to be, but it's still not going to be the same as feeding dams colostrum. Ideally, the dams colostrum or fresh colostrum. I think that goes back to the point with keeping some in the freezer and making sure you've got a stock if you need it.
So invest in a good freezer.
Yeah, invest in a good freezer and some and freezable bags as well. The bags are a lot easier than bottles. It will defrost so much quicker. And either a proper thawing machine or a soup urn that you can set at a temperature so it's not above 60 degrees and let it defrost as quickly as possible. But and definitely don't put it in the microwave.
Label the bag and
yeah.
put the bactometer on, isn't it?
Yeah, quality, the cow it's come from and the date as well, so you've got all the information there. So if anything, say the cow flags for Yonis, you can go to the freezer and you can pull it out and chuck it away if you need to. So it's just making sure you can identify it.
At the minute there are no more questions, so if you've got any questions on that section, if you're busy thinking about one, make sure you type it up and then we'll try and answer them at the end of Andy's last section. Yeah.
Okay, so when we talked about this, the other kind of aspect was really looking at different approaches. And I think a lot of this, you can, as long as you meet the key areas we've just kind of covered in the non-negotiables, you can have as much flexibility as you want really within the rest of the system. So I think the area of different approaches is so broad and wide, it's a little bit difficult to cover. But I guess you can look at it in two areas, possibly three. So the first option would be those farms that look to house the heifers from day one all the way through. Now, the benefit of this is consistency. You know what you're feeding the animal and you know the environment and everything else. So from a monitoring point of view, it's quite straightforward to achieve exactly what you want to do. There's less variables in there, but obviously there's a big cost to this. So the cost of housing that animal is significant through that period of time. You are going to be looking at £1,600 a head if you've started having to invest in the infrastructure to house those animals all the way through. And as long as you monitor the heifer, there's no real need to do it. There's a lot of information available to you to allow you to put the animals out to grass and benefit from cheaper feeding as long as you're monitoring the growth rates and achieve what they want to do all the way through. So that's fine. On the whole, most farms would start with their calves inside and then would transition outside. So that's great. If you start looking now at strip grazing or paddock grazing for those heifers, actually that's really efficient. They're getting top quality feed, and as long as you're monitoring the growth and supplementing as and when needed, so that may be on the fringes of the growing season where the grass quality is not quite there. It could be during periods of very wet weather where they can't physically eat enough because of the dry matter. Actually, grazing cattle can be really good. It's getting them used to being outside and strip grazing if you're going to go into a grazing system, but most importantly, it does bring the cost down of rearing those animals. The only really probably the most important bit is though it's measuring it and managing it. So again, it goes back to the weigh bars and understanding what you're doing. I think also within that, as I said at the start when we were talking about feed, it's really important to have consistency there. So when you move an animal from a diet inside of say silage and cake or straw and cake and you send them outside, you can't just assume that from day one we've moved them outside they're going to get everything from the grass. There's going to be a 2 to 3 week period where they need to adjust and actually change onto that grass-based diet. Now, it's not often practical to take the silage and everything else out for them in the field because you want them to eat the grass, but if you've got them on a rearing nut, you can take the rearing nut outside. So it's keeping some consistency in that diet. Now, it may be 3 weeks down the line, you find actually the calves are well above on the growth target, and therefore you can either reduce or take out that nut, which is fine. There's no issue with that, but it's just monitoring it and knowing exactly where you can make those changes and make those savings. But you need to keep consistency. And then the same thing goes when you come back inside the other way. You can't just bring a heifer in the day before you start serving her from a grass-based diet and cake onto a TMR ration, say, for example, and assume that the fertility is going to be great and they're all going to get in calf on day one. The likelihood is, if you start serving the day after you bring them in, you're going to have 3 weeks of pretty dire conception rates, and actually it's likely to be 4 or 5 weeks before they fully adjusted. So if you're bringing heifers in to serve, certainly in the autumn we see it quite often, you are better bringing those animals in 4 or 5 weeks before you're going to start service to get them adjusted, new group, new system, new routine and new diet to allow them to adjust properly. And then you will find the conception rate should, as long as the animals are right weight and right condition score, you should have good levels of consistent fertility in that period. So the main thing is measuring to manage. I think the third area to look at, and some of you will recognize this slide from a webinar a couple of weeks back, you sometimes need a plan B. So heifers can grow in lots of conditions and they can look after themselves, and this is fodder beet, and you can do a great job with fodder beet. But when the weather turns and if it gets to the point where it is unmanageable, you need a plan B, and you need some way of bringing them either back inside or onto some live back grazing. Otherwise you will find the growth rates you've achieved through the early stage of that animal's life either start to go backwards or they just stall, and then you'll struggle to hit that key breeding target or key weight targets going forward. So it is just having a bit of a plan B if you need it. It can be the same issue through the summer if it suddenly turns very wet. As I said before, you might find that the animals can't eat sufficient grass if they're outside because the dry matter's not there. So it's reintroducing some potentially some concentrate or some silage or something to buffer feed them through that wet period, and it's just allowing flexibility in there to adjust if and when you need to. And the same can be said for young calves. If you find you've got a disease outbreak in a group of calves, the last thing you want to be doing is adding healthy calves or additional healthy calves into that group. You may need a plan B of where you're going to put those animals, just to keep things moving and keep things going forward. So it's just kind of thinking forward and thinking where you're trying to get with it.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So if anybody has got any final questions, please make sure you type them in. On on the section you've just covered now on different approaches, do you think, Andy, there's room for housed all year round herds with their heifers instead of maybe traditionally probably they're set stocking in fields probably further away? Is there room, and have you looked at any benefits of maybe them taking up rotational grazing or paddock grazing with those heifers? And does it possibly, for a housed all year round system, is it better that the heifer is on a TMR style diet for when she goes into the herd full time, or is there a benefit for those sorts of heifers to be on a more similar diet to what they were, or what they will have when they're cows?
With an all year round, with a fully housed system, you're going to get that consistency. If you keep that heifer in, without a doubt, you'll get that consistency. As long as they're hitting the growth targets, you can easily carve them in at 22, 23 months and they'll fly in the herd. Either way, there's still a saving to be had by those animals going out to grass, but as long as you monitor it. With several of the calf to calving farms, that one of them was a robot farm, and they were fully housed. He put some heifers outside and he kept some heifers in. And we did find that the heifers inside maintained their growth better than those outside. But I think a part of that was a bit of a mental attitude from him as well. I think he was expecting the heifers out at grass to fail, and therefore didn't necessarily give them the same attention to the ones inside. Handling wasn't easy with those heifers, so they didn't weigh them while they're outside, so we didn't know they were as far behind as they were until they came back in. And that was the same on another farm as well. So I think for a farmer, you've got to want to do something for it to succeed. And I think actually that's probably more important than necessarily the system the heifer's in. It's got to be right for you. I think TB is probably an important aspect to bring in there as well. We're seeing more and more breakdowns of farms with the heifers in particular, where the farm's grown and they've got land away. The land away, often you can track it back and find the heifers are contracting TB when they're away from home from wildlife. And I think that can be a massive issue, and that can be a good reason to keep the animals housed and keep them in to avoid those issues.
Okay.
Any system can work, and I think it's really important that any system can work. But it's got, as I say, it's got to be right for you.
Okay. Any other questions? Please, in the last few moments now, make sure you type them in. But yeah, I don't think there's any more coming in at the minute, Andy. So if you want to just cover off some final conclusions before we finish.
So I think it's fairly simple. You've got to know what your costs are. There's plenty of averages out there, and next door it costs so much, or down the road it costs them X amount. You need to know what your costs are for all of this. And if you understand your costs, you can then start to target the areas where savings can potentially be made, or potentially increase cost to improve performance of those animals. It's not necessarily a one-way option. The bit I haven't kind of covered, but it's really important, is knowing how many heifers you need. It's very easy to slip into we'll rear lots of heifers because you never know what's going to happen. And now I understand TB obviously has a bearing on that in a lot of cases, but it is really expensive. If it's costing you somewhere between £1,000 and £1,500 to rear a heifer, you don't want to be rearing 10 spare just in case. There's a huge cost element there. So the use of sex semen and then beef on top of that does allow you to get a better value for those animals and rear them through. So it's understanding what you need. And if you also look at the infrastructure involved, if you only rear what you need, you don't need that extra shed space and everything else. I've said it all the way through, really. If you don't measure, you can't manage exactly what you're doing. So that is growth. And at various times when you're changing things, if you measure it, you can see whether it's working or whether there's changes can be made. And then this is really something that's coming through from milk processors now, that every calf has a value. So we're probably still shooting too many bull calves on farm, and actually we're getting to the point, and we really need to be thinking of every calf having a value, and we treat every calf the same way. So all the way through this, we've talked about heifer calves, but actually we need to be treating beef calves with the same colostrum management and the weighing to make sure they hit target and we get a return for it. Now, it's not that you're necessarily going to rear those animals through. You may well sell them and move them on, but the next person down the line needs to make sure they're getting a good, strong, healthy calf. So I think treat bull calves and heifer calves the same as you run through the system. I think that's really important.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy. Yeah, if there are any questions and you don't maybe get an opportunity to type them in before 2 o'clock now, don't worry. If you just type them or email them to myself, I'll make sure that Andy then gets to see them and reply. So yeah, if you think of any other questions in the meantime now, please do so. So yeah, finally, I'd like to just thank Andy for his time this afternoon. As you've seen, there's a lot of work that Andy was involved with, looking at very detailed costings of rearing heifers. I think probably unparalleled, really, in terms of costing heifers. It's something that has only been done fairly recently. The heifer rearing enterprise has been secondary, possibly to the milking enterprise. So it's something now that's becoming very, very important. And the way I look at it, it's a bit like a football club, who doesn't invest in an academy in the youth system. I think that every successful football team has a successful academy who know exactly how to bring these young players through, saves them having to buy expensive footballers. So having a good youth setup for your own farm, for your heifer rearing replacements, can only then benefit you when they come into the herd. So again, thanks very much for your time this afternoon, and hope you've enjoyed the webinar. And please keep up to date on the Farming Connect website to see when any future webinars are on. And thanks very much, and stay safe. Thank you.